Okay, so welcome you guys to a couple hours on effective project monitoring and controlling. So what I'm going to cover is we're going to cover is introduce ourselves, talk about the dimensions of project control, how we want to do risk-informed project controls rather than kind of blanket or ad hoc. Go over the inventory of available tools to help control projects. And then we're going to work through some sample dashboards and kind of pretend like we're looking at some data and ask ourselves, to diagnose the problem. And the last slide is a list of acronyms. I do tend to be acronym heavy. So if I forget to define one or whatever, you've always got that as the last slide you can refer to. So Level 4 Ventures, we were founded in 1994. We focus on helping government agencies achieve IT project and portfolio success through benchmark-based project modeling. So we normally start very early in the life, so at the early concept stage, alternative analysis, and then help with basically making sure projects are successful. And we do most of our work is on the government side of the table, as opposed to being part of a big vendor team or something like that. So we kind of prefer to be an adjunct to the government agencies that we support. I'll let Karen introduce Elyon.
Yeah, so Elyon was formed in 2008 and also focused on helping government agencies predominantly. That's the largest market that we serve, and a lot in health and human services as well. We focus on the strategy and architecture work to actually create the portfolio of projects that would walk out the change that is contemplated by the state agency or department. So looking at current state and future and determining what's the portfolio of change that needs to happen. We often bring William in to help estimate projects, as we are also involved in putting together the advanced planning documents and project approval documents that many state agencies need in order to get projects approved and funded.
Okay, thank you. So my background, I'm the founder of the company. I've written a bunch of books, columns, and so on. I've created a benchmarking tool called AccelerPlan that we use as part of our consulting work and also sell it as a commercial product. And I've got a bunch of certifications. Basically, I feel like in order for me to do a good job of helping to manage projects, I have to know as much as I can about the current state of the art and current best practices. Jump to Karen.
Yep. So my focus when I work with our clients is really on enterprise transformation and executive leadership. And I focus on helping the executives through the actual change itself. It's a pretty daunting task as an exec to be in charge of some massive projects or portfolio of change. So my focus is on supporting at the executive level. I have a number of certifications that have helped me along the years, including my certification as a transformation coach out of MIT. I have a number of enterprise architecture certifications as well. No books, though. I haven't written a book.
We'll have to work on that maybe. and Karen and I tag team each other and have a good time doing it.
Yes, we do.
All right. So I like to start these seminars by throwing some cold water onto you guys. And in particular, for anybody who's been involved in the IT world for a long time has witnessed project failures and has learned from that experience. Not necessarily your project, but you've seen projects fail around you. But somebody new to the field may not really be aware of just how common failures are, and they really are. And these failures are not inexpensive failures. I've got some examples from California there. where projects, failed projects can lose hundreds of millions of dollars. The Standish Chaos Report, and this is a little bit dated, but for that report demonstrated that a high percentage of the project were either challenged or failed. And whenever we're measuring these costs of failure, what we're measuring is normally the direct project costs, but the indirect costs can be even greater. So things like wasted staff time, lost opportunity costs, the impact to your stakeholders. And there's something that people often don't think about, but once you have a project fail, then when you try to restart that project or start a new project to fill in the gap, your vendors are going to charge a risk premium because they're aware of the failure and they're going to be gun shy. If we look at a 2019 study by KPMG and others, global survey, what they found was 19% of organizations deliver successful projects at least most of the time, which means that, what is it, 81% don't. 30% of organizations deliver projects consistently on time. 36% deliver projects on budget. 44% deliver projects that meet the original goals and business intent. And 46% receive stakeholder satisfaction scores, or good scores in stakeholder satisfaction. So the bottom line is that if we look at that, none of those are even at the 50-50 level. They're all below a coin toss in terms of whether your project is going to have a problem or not. So one element of being in that small percentage of successful projects is to control your projects. It's not the only element. There's other ones that we talk about that in the other seminars, things like scope definition and so on. But one important element is project control. So when we're doing project control, we need to ensure that the project meets its objectives. And when we're talking about that, we're really talking about objectives across 5 different dimensions. So the first is cost. So we would like the project to stay within budget, obviously. Schedule, we'd like to deliver on time. And often those are the two that primarily come to mind when people think about project control. And a lot of times control agencies will make the mistake of focusing just on those two. And that can really be problematic. So we really want to also look at the other 3. The third is business capability. So is the project meeting the business objectives as defined in California, it's PAL stage documentation, project approval lifecycle documentation. But in your organization, it might be a project charter, a business case, something like that. So there's basically a business reason to be doing this project. And the question is does the project as delivered achieve the objectives that were laid out in the business case, whatever that might be? The fourth area is technical capabilities. So here we want to know, does it meet the technical requirements as defined in the project approval lifecycle stage documentation in California or elsewhere, the project charter or wherever these things are defined, and also the contract is another place where these are normally defined. And these technical capabilities normally include things like system performance, reliability, security, and maintainability. And there may be others as well. So are we meeting the technical requirements that define what a good system should look like? And then the final category is conformance. So what conformance is saying is the system as delivering conforming to or meeting requirements related to basically requirements. So these can be regulatory requirements. These can be requirements of the contract. So if the contract requires that the project deliver this particular document, well, was that document delivered? So we have to remember that we do we are dealing in it's not like a very free form thing where, I gave you some software and then we're done. We have some checklists that we have to make sure that we've met all the deliverable requirements, we've met all the regulatory requirements and so on. So that whole area is called conformance.
So William, on your previous slide where you shared the proportion of projects that fail, Imran has a question. And it's basically, are the low numbers due to the time it takes to implement these projects? Meaning if it's a long-term project, things change, expectations change.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
So
the Standish Group report does get into that level of granularity. And obviously, as you would expect, the larger the project, the longer the project, the higher the probability of problems. And shorter duration, more constrained, simpler projects, the success rate is much higher. The KPMG study didn't get into a lot of granularity on that. It was more along the lines of organizational capabilities across their portfolios. Okay. So when we look at project control dimensions, the ones that the 5 that I just talked about, I'm going to quite often, oops, let me back up here. Quite often, everybody's focused in on cost and schedule because those are quantitative, they're easy to measure, they're high visibility. Going to ask for more money or more time involves a lot of people. So a lot of times those seem like the most important. But I will tell you that having been at this for, 30, 40 years, whatever it is, that in the long run, for most projects, the long-term priorities from highest to lowest are business capability is number 1, technical capability is number 2, number 3 is conformance, and that's primarily number 3 because if you get audited and it turns out that you're not compliant with the contracts or the regs, it can be a big problem. And then the last is the least important is either cost or schedule, and these two vary depending on the project. So why is that? Well, what I find is that cost and schedule problems will be forgotten eventually, but problems with business capability or technical capability live on forever. So we're all focused on the project. And from the project perspective, cost and schedule problems can be a big deal. But we forget that once we're done with the project, and assuming we deliver something, then the business unit is going to be running that software for 10, 15, 20 years. And do we really think after the project is done and 10 years have passed that people are going to remember even that we had an overrun or we were 6 months late? They're not. Nobody's going to be around who even remembers that. But are they going to remember the fact that every time they go to use this system, it's a pain in the butt? They're absolutely going to remember that and be unhappy with it and be trying to get a replacement or something. So basically, you want to always focus on making sure you deliver good business capability and good supporting technical capability. Making significant sacrifices in business or technical capability for the sake of cost or schedule is almost always a bad idea in the long run. Now, I do want to caveat this a little bit. I'm not talking about gold plating here. So I'm not talking about a bunch of nice to have things that people seldom use and that aren't that important. What I'm talking about is functionality that would significantly improve the ability of the business to accomplish their mission. So if functionality will have a significant impact on the ability of the business to do their mission or to be effective in doing their mission, that functionality should not be cut for the sake of cost or schedule. I don't think ever. Karen, what do you think? Does this line up with your experience?
Yeah, for sure. I was just sitting here thinking about, projects that you and I have gone in and assessed that were in some stage of um, turning of the wrong corner or,
Hmm.
needing a restart or whatever. And it tended to be around issues of the product not appearing to meet the customer's expectations, the needs of the business, if you will.
Hmm.
One recently where that was absolutely the case, and even put a halt to the project because the users were highly concerned that if it went live, that it would make their lives worse than today. So
Hmm.
absolutely,
Yeah.
the
Yeah, if we go into a project for an assessment, that's a project that's in trouble for an assessment. If it's in good shape in terms of business capability, technical capability, which includes quality, um, then
Mhm.
more than likely we're going to say give it more money, give it more time.
Yes, yes, exactly.
but, but
Yeah,
but if it's not in good shape in those two dimensions, then more than likely we're going to say you need to revamp it, do a major revamp or a restart or something like that.
yeah.
Yeah, good. All right. Now there's a misguided, there may be a misguided idea that with respect to project controls, the more the better. And so I want to dissuade you from thinking that way. All project controls have costs associated with them. And so these costs include direct costs of implementing the control, applying it, and monitoring it. So the control itself is not free. They have indirect costs in areas like project meetings, distractions, data reporting, documentation. So you're adding a burden to the project in order to support control. They also have derived costs in areas such as if you have a really strict amount of control on a project, then people are going to be doing padding of the cost and the schedule, which has a cost in and of itself. And they're going to be doing technical over engineering because they're so worried about having this control get red flagged in the technical area. And then you're going to have a opportunity cost where your key project personnel are focusing on these control related activities rather than building stuff, building software. So all of these things, some of them obvious and directly measurable, some of them fuzzy, but still there, represent costs of project controls. And so we're going to talk about, so I want to talk about a risk-based approach to project control. And so to do that, I want to start with a slide just to level set with some terms. So these are all from the ISO terms that are related to risk. So risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. The level of risk is the magnitude of the risk, which is expressed in terms of a consequence and a likelihood. The consequence is the degree to which an event will affect out objectives. The likelihood is the chance of something happening. The event is the occurrence or change of a particular set of circumstances. Now, I want to pause for a moment and and um, talk about something that's a common mistake with respect to risk management. Risk management tends to view risks as bad things, but correct ISO risk management says that risks are areas of uncertainty, and that uncertainty can be a positive or a negative. Those are both risks because in one case, the uncertainty revolves around something bad that could happen. But in the other case, the risk revolves around something good that might happen. And you really want your risk management process to be looking at both. You really want to look for um, opportunities where you might be able to achieve something better than expected, and then track those as part of your risk management process as well. Okay, so going back to the list here, risk assessment involves risk identification, analysis, and evaluation. Management is coordinated activities to direct and control an organization with regard to risk. Treatment is the process of modifying a risk. So in the case of threats, it would normally be one of avoidance, one or more, of avoidance, mitigation, acceptance, or transfer. And then the residual risks are the risks remaining after treatment. Okay. And I thought, did a question come in, Karen, in the chat? I think I saw one scroll past me.
So first of all, Carrie, when we were talking about, business capability kind of being the number one area to really focus on, her question was around how can you spot those issues? And I know you're going to talk a little bit about that, in the course of this presentation. But how do you know that it's turning in the wrong direction? What are some early indicators, that's turning in the wrong direction? For me, one of the first things I look for is to make sure that you do have a repeatable, valuable process for receiving the client feedback or the business feedback as the product is being developed. And certainly in the definition, in waterfall type projects where you're defining requirements ahead of time, it's the making sure that, you're utilizing those requirements. We've run across projects where they kind of get put on the shelf, right? And so I don't know what else you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think it's really one aspect of it is making sure that the right people have the authority and are in a decision-making role with respect to this area. But the other one is the engineering tools I'm going to be talking about later on. And most of those engineering tools are really designed to improve communication between the business users and the technical team. And the improved communication, the primary purpose of that is to make sure that the system as built meets the business objectives. And what you'll find for the tools that I'm going to outline, because they're project control related tools, there's a general core concept here, which is that most business users don't have the skill set or the patience to look at detailed technical documentation and understand the implications of that on their life. So in general, if we have technical documentation that's really great for your technical team, entity relationship diagrams and flow charts, detailed flow charts and stories and a lot of this other kind of stuff. Your business users are often going to miss the implications of what they're agreeing to. So what you're going to find in the tools that I'm going to lay out is, as much as possible, I believe that those key business decisions need to be made visible with things like a prototype or a proof of concept or something that people can see and relate to and understand is a very important part of making sure we're meeting the business objectives. And I'll talk about some other ones as well.
There was also a comment and question around the differences really kind of in a remote or hybrid work environment where for most, when you're reviewing, say, architecture decisions or engineering decisions or business decisions, there's you start getting 150 people attending those meetings, right?
Right.
To weigh in, and sometimes they're welcomed, the 150, because the folks don't want important requirements to be missed. And there's a balance because obviously there's a huge productivity hit to the enterprise when you have these enormous meetings that everyone feels they need to attend in order to weigh in on some of these important decisions. But it's having the right decisions with the right people, and good governance around those decisions. That's
exactly.
important.
Yeah. Yeah, I personally think that um, large meetings to make decisions and to get that kind of input are always a problem and always a sign that something's not set up right. I think that what that's saying is that um, we haven't really identified who the key decision makers are.
Right.
We don't have processes in place to collect and organize the necessary input data for those
Mhm.
decision makers to get their input. So you might be doing a survey or an interview with 100 people and then putting together what are the key decisions here.
Mhm.
And then it's going to be one or two people that are going to be the ones who make that final decision or final determination. So it's really, I think it's kind of laziness to try to bring everybody into a room and get the data that way. It should be smaller groups. Even if you're dealing with um, design of a very large system, you can break that system down into components, and
Mhm.
then each component you can have 7 or 10 people who are responsible for making the decisions and giving the input for each one of those areas, those aspects of the system. Doesn't have to be the same 7 or 10 people. It could be, but you don't want to have a big, huge thing. Now, in terms of the remote question, um, uh, Karen, you and I have talked about this, but what I've found personally is that things work very, very well with in-person meetings, and things work very, very well with remote meetings, Zoom, Teams, whatever. Where I don't think they work well is with hybrid, where like half of the participants are there in person and half of the participants are there,
Yeah.
via Zoom or whatever.
Yeah.
I think those meetings tend to be ineffective, have a significant drop in effectiveness.
Yeah, I don't really feel like that's where Imran was going with
Okay.
the topic, not necessarily evaluating the value of hybrid meetings, but more so the point of large numbers of people being in meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I would agree with you.
Okay. So, um, and again, what I'm giving you is my recommendations here. But so selecting appropriate project controls is a risk spend efficiency exercise where it has a cost, it has a benefit, and you want to make sure that the total works out. So is the level of risk reduction significantly greater than the total cost of the project control? And as some rules of thumb, I would say that if your key people are spending more than 5% of their time in project control related meetings, you probably have a project control problem. I would say if your project control meetings, the ones that are there to help manage, get decisions and so on, um, other than milestone reviews, which by their nature are big, but if your project control meetings have more than 3 to 7 people in attendance, you probably have a problem. You probably haven't identified who are the right people to be making this decision. Um, while it's possible to use a quantitative approach to this risk spend efficiency, for this seminar, I'm primarily going to use a heuristic approach. So mostly I'll be using the Pareto principle to select or to avoid the clear choices. But as a first step, I want to talk about the project control tool landscape. So what are the tools that we'll be using? So I'm really going to be talking about these: project milestone reviews, earned value management, outcome-focused work order authorizations, which are for other organizations outside of California, you'll know them as task orders. So outcome-focused task orders or order authorizations. And I'll talk about those in either a comprehensive approach or a rolling wave approach to those. Another one is independent reviews. Another one is your risk register. And then finally, I'm going to talk about a variety of project deliverables that can be defined in your WOAs or in your task orders that are going to be related to project control. So I'll cover each area individually with a description and a bit of a review of when this approach would be applicable. So let's start with milestone reviews. Milestone reviews are formal reviews. So they are a chance for, they normally last a day or 2 or 3, depending on the size of the project and the scope. They could be half a day for a small project, but they're formal. They're going to have an agenda. They're going to have presentations. They're going to have checklists. They're going to have demos. It really is a chance for the project to pull in stakeholders that may otherwise not be involved too much in the project, to pull in senior management kind of people, to if nothing else, to maybe give a little 15-minute talk at the beginning to the project team. So it's really a kind of a formal point in time type review. And these are used to approve the project at that point in time. And so as a minimum, what we normally would cover is the engineering artifacts up to that point. We would cover the software itself. So this normally is in the form of prototypes or a phased delivery, maybe as part of the software is working, or a proof of concept, or a demonstration, but it's something related to the software other than a document. Something that people can actually, you put it up on a projector and people can see it. And then we cover project management stuff. So how's the project doing in terms of schedule, budget, earned value, the deliverables, we're doing like a conformance review as well. External schedule management. So in other words, the project schedule that we provide to external stakeholders outside of the project team should be at the project milestone review level. It should not be lower. It should not be in the details of the project. And this milestone schedule that we provide to external stakeholders should be conservative. There should be some slack time built into it so that it should be, your goal should be that it should be unusual for those milestone dates to change. People should be able to schedule travel around those milestone dates a couple months in advance. Senior managers should be able to block out some time during that months in advance with some confidence that the date's not going to change. So the detailed schedule that the project team uses internally to manage the project, that's going to change all the time. It's going to be, things slip, things change, things get moved here and there, things get expanded. You don't want that level of granularity, that level of uncertainty, that level of change to be at a higher level to the external stakeholders. Your milestones should be gate reviews, by which I mean the project should, each milestone should have a formal sign-off and that at that review. And without that formal sign-off, the project can't go forward. So if there's a problem that's identified, until and unless there's either corrective action taken or an approved corrective action plan or a rebaselining or some other major change in the project, you shouldn't go forward and continue to spend money. So that gives them a lot of pressure, but it's a good pressure. It's the kind of pressure that you want. As a minimum, you should have some kind of a review to cover requirements, a software requirement review. You should have some kind of a design review that's focused on your architectural decisions and your patterns. So that could be a critical design review. If you're these terms are from the IEEE standard. You need a test readiness review, which is to say that the system is ready for testing. You need a production readiness review to say the system is ready for deployment. And then you need a post-implementation evaluation review, which is to say that the system is operating and meeting the business objectives. Now, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 reviews. Between the test readiness review and the production readiness review, you may have a milestone at the completion of system integration test, and you may have a milestone at the completion of user acceptance test. So you might have a couple in there, or maybe not. For long projects, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 reviews may not be enough, because you really want to make sure that your reviews happen about every 6 months. Maybe on a short project, they might be every couple months, but you really don't want them going much longer than 6 months, because it doesn't give you enough recovery time if a problem is identified. So if you have a long project, then you're likely going to break the SRR and the CDR, or somehow break it into phases, so that you're able to get a review about every 6 months. Now, if you're doing agile development, then what you can do is you can use those agile development to define your milestones, where you're building part of the functionality leading up to each one of the milestone reviews. So maybe one of them you're focused on the case management component, the next one you're focused on financial reporting, the next one you're focused on some other area. And so you're basically focusing on different elements of the scope for each one of these phases, if you will. And normally, if you're doing like agile development, what you would do is during each one of these milestone defined phases, during one phase, you'll be working on the detailed requirements for the following phase. So if I'm working on the case management coding and testing and sign off, then my milestone review would cover all the case management stuff. But I would also be let's say the next one is financial reporting. I would also be working on the detailed requirements for financial reporting. So in addition to signing off on the build work for case management, I'll be signing off on the detailed requirements for the financial reporting. Then the following phase, we'll be building financial reporting, and maybe we're doing the requirements for the interfaces. So now, again, at that milestone, I'm signing off on the build work for financial reporting and the detailed requirements for interfaces. And so you're kind of leapfrogging it that way during the project. If you structure this right, there's a couple advantages, big advantages of milestone reviews. One is it kind of time boxes things, and it gets everybody focused on building things towards a deadline, which is useful. Another advantage is it's really helpful in terms of expectation management for your end users, because representatives from the end user community a lot of representatives from the end user community don't need to be involved throughout all the work. They can come in just for the milestone review and see the demos, hear the presentations, look at the requirements. And so they're able to understand what's going on for the project just by being involved, once every 6 months or so. So a lot of senior managers will be able to make use of that. And then also, because we're doing these as gate reviews, we're ensuring that a project is never more than a few months off track. So even if we have a problem as identified during a milestone review, it's not like we didn't do any work for 6 months. We did some work, but we didn't get to where we need to get to. Well, okay, we can say, okay, now we're 3 months behind. What do we have to do to fix this problem? Do we need to re-baseline? Do we need to change scope? Do we need to change our approach? What do we have to fix in order to get back on track? So it helps make sure that a project never gets too far off track. Just going to periodically come over to the chat window here.
Yeah, I think, William, we pretty much handled everything in the chat.
Okay, good. Whoops, don't mean that to happen. All right. So milestone reviews, I really think they can be used on every project. The larger the project, the more critical they are. The only projects where I would say that they're useful, but not absolutely critical, would be a project that'll be done in under 6 months. So if a project is going to be 6 months or longer, I would say you really need to set up milestone reviews. And if a project is under 6 months, you probably should do it anyway. All right. And for projects that I've managed or been involved in the project management process, I've used them on 100% of the projects. Okay, earned value management. So what we're doing with earned value management is we're measuring actual work accomplished versus our baseline values as of a given date. And so we only have to capture a few input data elements to be able to do earned value management. It's really not that onerous to do it. We need to know the planned value, or how much work do we expect to have done as of a given point in time. We need to know the earned value. How much work do we actually accomplish as of that same point in time? We need to know the actual cost. How much did we spend to do that work? And we need to know the actual effort. How many labor hours in total did we spend to do that work? And traditional earned value management, which primarily came out of the construction industry, all these were measured in terms of dollars, but I'll talk in a moment about some weaknesses of that for IT projects. Then the calculations that we're going to do a schedule performance index. And so that's going to be the earned value divided by the planned value. We're going to do a cost performance index, earned value divided by actual cost, and an effort performance index, earned value divided by actual effort. So schedule measures the health of the project in terms of schedule. Cost performance index measures the health of the project in terms of budget. And effort performance index measures the health of the project in terms of people, labor components, people working on it. For all of these, they're structured and designed so that a number of 1.0 means the project is on track. So you're on schedule, you're on cost, or your labor burn rate is correct. Above 1 means you're doing better than plan. So above 1 is a good thing. Below 1 means you're doing worse than plan. So it means a potential problem. So there's some strengths and weaknesses of earned value management. The biggest strength, well, one strength is it's not really that hard to collect the data. Most of the data that you need is already going to be there. It's just a question of assembling it. Another strength is that study after study after study has shown that it's a very effective predictor of project health. So by the time a project is between 15 and 20% done, the earned value management numbers are with almost 100% confidence going to be predicting whether the project is going to ultimately be a success or a failure. Well, across the dimension being measured. So if we're 20% into the project and the schedule performance index says that we're behind schedule, we can be pretty confident, like with a high degree of confidence, that we're going to have a schedule problem, and we might as well go ahead and figure out what we're going to do about that. There are some weaknesses, and the primary weaknesses come up because of the nature of IT projects. And in particular, these come up if we're measuring strictly using dollars. So the issue that we have is that let's say that that we're going to be measuring our progress based on delivering documents. And so maybe we have a software requirement spec. We have a software detail design. We have a software test plan. Those are the deliverables that we're going to be creating. Well, it would be very easy for us let's say we're being measured with earned value management. The natural tendency is going to be to use the budget for those items as the definition of complete. And so what we're going to do is we're going to shrink the scope of the documents. We're going to shrink the scope of the software to match the money and the time that we have. And what that will show up as from an earned value management perspective is the project will appear to be exactly on track in terms of budget, schedule, and so on throughout almost the entire project life. And then once we get to user acceptance test, we'll suddenly realize that the system that we've built is deficient. So maybe it doesn't meet the business requirements. Maybe it is poor quality. Maybe it doesn't meet the technical requirements fully. Maybe it's not maintainable. Any problem like that won't show up until the very end. And so that's where you have this phenomena of, and it's very common in IT, of a project that's on schedule, on budget, on schedule, on budget, on schedule, on budget for 18 months, 24 months, 36 months. Then you get to the end of the project, and all of a sudden you realize that, oh, wait a second, we've got 2 more years worth of work to do in order to get this to be acceptable. So it doesn't work very well. So how do we overcome that? We overcome that by integrating something called function point equivalence into the earned value management process, and then using those function point equivalents as a measure of planned value and earned value. So we still capture actual cost and actual effort, but our planned value and our earned value now is not something arbitrary, instead, or something financial. Instead, it's to what extent, how much progress have we made towards delivering the business functionality that this system has to deliver? And that progress will be the measure of what we've accomplished. And so it allows earned value management on an IT project to track with the delivered business functional components as the project moves through its life and avoids that problem I just talked about.
Oh, and William, I think you just addressed a comment that was it's in the chat, which is so there's a couple of questions here. One, but I'll address the comment, and I think it's Lilia says that a project manager told her that EVM wasn't truly applicable to Agile projects because the work was is done in sprints, and if you're managing the other 2 dimensions, right, just what you said, you'll always be on schedule and on budget, but you're not necessarily doing the earned value. And what you're mentioning is that the function point equivalent gives you the opportunity to see where value is either being delivered or not delivered to the degree, to the level that it was expected. I think it's probably that and a combination of having in an Agile project the good ways to build in your product owner reviews so that you have an opportunity to get feedback during the sprints and during development and even during story creation, so you're not finding that you're at the end and you have that big mismatch.
Right.
There's a question, Grace has a question, can you use EVM to manage a portfolio that has several projects in it, or do you have to use it for each project?
That's interesting. I've never had that question. Yes. Normally the way you do it with a portfolio is you would measure the EVM for each of the projects within the portfolio, and then use the numbers and the trends to develop a consolidated health for the portfolio overall. You could do EVM for an entire portfolio by rolling up the more detailed numbers and then doing the schedule performance index CPI and so on at the portfolio level. I'm not sure if that would, I've never heard of anyone doing that. And I'm not sure it would be a good idea, because what I think would happen would be, the effect of that would be that your larger projects would obscure problems within your smaller projects. So I think that you, while mathematically you could do it, I don't think you'd want to do it.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay.
Just two other comments.
Okay.
Way earlier on, Imran was asking about, for the gate reviews, do we have templates that we can offer? Are there templates available? CMS had some templates when everybody was implementing the HIEs for these types of gate reviews, right? Is there something available that you would be providing, William?
Yeah, there absolutely are. There's, first of all, there's an IEEE standard covering these gate reviews. And so I don't know that I would necessarily use that exactly, but I would use that as my starting point, and then tailor that to the project. And then for most of those reviews, a key component of the review agenda is going to come from IV&V, independent verification validation, where most IV&V vendors have a review checklist that they can use for each one of these gate reviews, and that would be a second input into it. But those two sources and then tailoring those to the project is how I would do it.
Back on EVM, Jonathan mentions there's a GAO guide on doing EVM in Agile projects. And they use it at the FAA.
Oh, very good. Okay, so I'll have to look for that. I haven't read that. Yeah. Perfect. I love those GAO guides too. They're I wouldn't even say, I've never read one that wasn't well put together and researched and useful. The last bullet, just to kind of emphasize this whole Agile thing, with the FPE, the function point equivalent approach, on a government project, you will, I'm going to say always. I always hate to use the word always, because then someone always, then you're trying to find an exception. But I will say, for larger mission critical, in particular, government projects, you will always need to have some indication of what the total scope of the project is going to need to be when you're done, at the level at least of an order of magnitude of the number of function point equivalents. And then as you're doing your Agile sprints, and as you're doing your phases, if you're, for between the milestone reviews, you can then allocate those down and use those to inform your Agile sprints. So it actually, I would say EVM is even more critical on an Agile project than it is on a waterfall project, because EVM is going to help you to make sure that you don't spend all the money you can justify on the first set of capabilities, which might end up gold plated, and not leave you enough money to implement very critical things downstream. Okay, and I know it's almost 10, but we'll go a little bit farther, then we'll take a brief break.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you.
Or do you want to take one now? I mean, what slide number is this? 16. We're about halfway through the slides.
Yep.
Okay, let's take it's 10 o'clock. Let's take a 5-minute break till 10:05.
Sounds good.
All right, I've got 10:05, so let's jump back into it. So work order authorizations or task orders should be structured as little mini firm fixed price contracts. They should have a clearly defined scope of work. They should have clearly defined deliverables, unambiguous, just like any other firm fixed price contract. If your project is not too large, the task order or the work order authorization could cover the entire project. But maybe you're using agile development, or maybe the project is very large and you're not really sure of everything that needs to be done. So for those larger complex projects or those agile development projects, then the work order should cover all the work up to the next major project milestone review. And so that might be 6 months worth of work with a clearly defined scope for the work. And depending on who's doing the work, or maybe if it's one company doing the work, you might include build work and you might include design work to do the detailed design for the next phase. The deliverables in the work orders should be outcome focused and concrete rather than simply activities. So a bad deliverable is something like conduct system testing. You want to avoid those. A better deliverable is something like deliver a software test plan, software test cases, and software test results. And a better one would be deliver a software test plan, a minimum of 1,000 software test cases and software test results are compliant with IEEE 829-2008. So that's about, that one is something that is very unambiguous in terms of scope, in terms of estimating, in terms of assigning resources, and so on. The middle one is decent, especially once you reach a cadence with the vendor. But anything that's focused on activities is problematic. Independent reviews are outside experts that come in and are looking at stuff, kind of like an auditor or something like that. They're looking at things and then providing you their professional assessment of, where there's problems and where things are working well. So the three that I'm going to talk about, the three main ones that you'll see on IT projects. So you have the most common one is independent verification and validation, or IV&V. And so verification, the independent assessor will verify compliance with the contract and internal consistencies between the documents. So verification is focused on conformance. Both of those reviews are conformance, are dealing with conformance issues. And then they will also look at validation. Validation is to validate that the items being delivered are fit for purpose. So they'll look at the contract deliverables and they'll look to make sure that those deliverables as delivered are fit for purpose. So they're helping with business risk. Then your quality assurance vendor, quality assurance looks at, confirms that the processes that are supposed to be followed are being followed. So the processes may be defined by standards that are included in the contract, or they may be processes that were promised within the vendor proposal and therefore are included by reference. So they'll either be looking for reference standards like IEEE or whatever, or they'll be or company standards like the California standard for something, or they'll be or organizational standards, or as long as those are referenced in the contract, or they'll be looking at the vendor proposal. And if the vendor promised they're going to do code walkthroughs, they're going to make sure that the vendor is doing code walkthroughs. So in both cases, though, or all those cases, we're dealing with conformance. They'll also look at quality control, where they're identifying defects in documents and software. So they're looking primarily for technical risk. Then the project assessment process and vendor is assessing the overall project health in terms of the probability of achieving the project goals with a high quality and within the allocated budget, schedule, and level of effort, and identifying potential problems that would require corrective action. So the project assessment review is more like an outside audit, if you will. So IV&V and QA/QC are normally ongoing, whereas an independent project assessment is something that's normally more periodic. So for example, it might be annual during a long project's life. Or if a project is using an independent advisor, which is a role California has, where it brings in outside experts to help advise the project management office, the state project management office, then that independent advisor may often do the periodic assessments as part of their contract. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the risk register. Most of you are familiar with risk registers, but the risk register defines your risk items, the status of mitigations. And then I'll just point out that higher severity items in the risk register may be reported externally, and that this is another source for project control related information. But it's pretty common, well understood. So beyond making sure it's on the list, I don't really have much to talk about with this. Then there's some project deliverables that will be defined in your contract or in your work order authorization or in your task order that are related to project control. So we have engineering artifacts, which helps with, let me just a second here, there we go. We have engineering artifacts, which are, specifications and so on. Software requirement specification, your detailed design, your database design, things like that. And so those are there to help with business and technical risk. And so things that you want to make sure that you're on the same page with your business users and that the system you're building is going to be maintainable and have performance and so on. The second type of project control, project deliverable related control, is identifying architectural patterns. So for example, if we have a service-oriented architecture, we can be identifying services that are be shared across the project. If we have a rule-based approach to implementing business rules, then we can define our business rule engine, the structure of our rules, how those rules are tied into our user interface, and so on. Another example is a multi-tier architecture pattern, where we have kind of a layered approach to implementing capabilities. And this is just examples. So in all cases, though, your architectural patterns are there to help with business and technical control. Prototypes is a very useful approach because prototypes will help you prove out a concept, and there's something that are very relatable and understandable to your business users, even your non-technical business users. So I'm a big believer in using prototypes early in the project life to illustrate what the thing's going to look like when it's done, or to illustrate how something's going to function. And so those are designed to help with your business control. Interface is another area that can often be challenging on projects, on IT projects. And so an approach to controlling your interface related work are bridges and test harnesses. So in both cases, what we're doing, bridges, we're basically building a capability to bridge between a legacy system or a commercial off-the-shelf product, something like that, and our application, and then or maybe between multiple applications, and then that bridge defines the translation. And so by having a bridge in place, it will partially isolate your interface work from the external world. So it's really designed to help your team build a more maintainable interface, even without full access to some of the external interfaces that you might be ultimately working with. A test harness is something that simulates an interface. And so it's really designed so that prior to the interface being fully functional, anyone who's going to be needing to use that interface is able to test and certify their interface or their code to make sure that it's compatible, that it works. So you might implement a test harness and then publish that to your vendor community. So maybe you've got a dozen vendors out there, and you want those vendors to be able to talk to your system, but your system's not built yet. So you might build and publish a test harness and tell your vendors, if your software talks to this test harness and gives you a green light, then we will guarantee that that means it will talk to our system. And so that's an approach to controlling the interface work. Another area is technical white papers. So things like an analysis of cost, schedule, trade-offs, alternatives, impacts. One of the keys to effective decision-making for project decisions is to embody those decisions and then in these technical white papers, rather than having these things all be discussed in an ad hoc meeting. Because what that does is, first of all, it requires some people, engineers normally, to do this white paper, to write it all up and to document it. So they're doing a lot of the decision planning work without involving big, huge groups. So it's more efficient. It gives the decision makers the information that they need to make an informed decision. And then it documents the basis of that decision. So on any large project, whenever you have areas where you need a technical decision, you should be thinking, should we do a technical white paper to define the parameters for making that decision? So it helps with business and technical risk. Code walkthroughs, where you have developers or IV&V walking through code, are a good approach to helping with some forms of project control. And then simulations, much like prototypes, are very useful because you can actually play with things, see what the impact of changes are. So for example, you can simulate different training approaches, and then training modalities, how long the classes are. And then you have to put the extra work into building the simulation. But once the simulation is done, it allows the decision makers, to ad hoc, interactively play with a variety of alternatives and then come up with some kind of an optimization that works for them. So that helps with technical risk. So depending on the type of control concerns that you have, the type of areas where you feel that the project needs added control, you could look at this list of potential project deliverables and make sure that the appropriate ones are included as part of your contract or your WOA or your task orders.
So William, a couple questions.
Uh-huh.
When you talked about prototypes, are you basically talking about, Mary Liz's question, is this around proof of concepts or demos? What are you talking about with prototypes?
Well, both of those and more. So, for example, user interface prototypes are really useful to let the user see, what the system is likely to look like. If we have a system where we're going to need to develop a mobile strategy, where parts of the functionality will be available on mobile devices, then a prototype of the mobile user interface and how that might work would be very good. Let's say that we have a business rules engine that we're going to be purchasing or building or whatever. Then a prototype of that business rules engine actually operating with a screen so that we can actually see how changing the business rules change the system behavior and see how that works. So any area of uncertainty with respect to how the system will operate, either technically or from a user's perspective or from a business perspective, it's a good idea to do a prototype to illustrate that, demonstrate that, prove that out prior to getting too far down the path of building it.
So, and there's also a question about, we were talking about WOAs, the work order authorizations, and, there being an ideal duration or interval for work order authorizations, probably project dependent, determining, what is the right interval. But many of the projects that we've worked on have had WOAs on a monthly basis. Do you see problems with that approach? Obviously, there's an administrative workload that
Right.
goes with that, but can you talk a little bit about monthly WOAs?
Yeah, horrible idea. Horrible idea. Remember that all elements of project control have a cost, and what we're looking to do is to elevate the components of project control to big enough that the project is relatively stable. The health of the project can be monitored with the minimum amount of work, but we're still recoverable in the event that a problem is identified. And so that's why in terms of the project milestone schedule, that's why in terms of the structures of the WOA, you really want to be thinking in terms of 6-month kind of timeframes. You don't want to be having the project control components dealing with the details of the detailed project plan, dealing with the details of individual little contracts and so on. Now, within the project, I don't mind at all if the project has sprint teams that establish something similar to a WOA to manage a sprint even, or if they find a way that reaches a nice cadence for them to manage it internally, that's perfectly fine. But you don't want to have that elevate to the level of external stakeholder visibility. You don't want that level of granularity for contracting. You really want to keep those types of things at a higher level of granularity. It's more efficient. And also at the low level, it's kind of like making sausage, that old analogy people talk about. There's always a bunch of bad stuff happening in a project. That's just the nature of the thing. And most of those bad things that happen are little tiny things that get fixed and then you go on. They get fixed. You have a problem, you get it fixed, you go on. That's the sausage, the making of the sausage part of it. And the project is going to look unhealthy if all of those things are elevated in visibility. So what you want to do is you want to have your project control at a higher level where we're looking at, gosh, this sausage is delicious. And that's how you want to manage and control your project. And then you'll be perceived as successful and everyone will be happier and you're not micromanaging. Anything else? We're good?
Yeah, I think we're good.
All right. So here's a little tool selection matrix talking about the different dimensions of control. So cost, schedule, business, technical, and conformance. And the tools along the left-hand side. And then the black dot means that this tool is well suited to that. So you can kind of see, first of all, why I'm a big fan of project milestone reviews, because they work across every single dimension. You can also see why I'm a big fan of outcome-focused statements of work. So outcome-focused WOAs or task orders or contracts, because again, they help manage things across all dimensions. I'm also a fan for more complex projects where you don't have the resources for independent reviews. Now that might be an outside contractor, or it might be an independent review by a control agency or by your CIO. You know, but I think that the idea of having somebody come in and monitor, just do a periodic assessment of the project health is useful, especially if the project is larger and more complex. And then for the rest of them, pick the ones that are appropriate, that where you see risk or where you have concerns. In terms of tool selection versus project characteristics, in terms of size and duration, milestone reviews, I'd say if you have a project that's over $1 million, over 6 months, that you should do project milestone reviews. If it's under 6 months, under $1 million, you could do them, but you could probably get away without them if you wanted to. Earned value management, the threshold I'm using here is over 10 million and over 1 year. I'll point out that the federal threshold for EVM is 20 million. But if you look at the federal EVM requirements, they require certification both for the people and the EVM tools. So implementing EVM on a federal project is a big deal, and it limits competition. So they're a little bit more reluctant to use it on those middle-sized projects. Since most state government projects, local government projects don't have, you can do more informal EVM. I think that it applies on smaller projects. Outcome-focused WOAs or work order or task orders or statements of work, all projects, no matter how big, no matter how small. Independent reviews, I would say maybe over $5 million in over a year. You might want to consider that. Risk register, obviously all projects. Engineering artifacts, you're going to have engineering artifacts for all project sizes, but you should tailor what you ask for and what you ask for, both in terms of what documents and the content of those documents. So a big project is going to have a lot more documents and a lot longer table of contents, a lot more elements within it. Whereas a small, simple project, your software requirement spec might be 3 pages. You know, so you don't necessarily have to have a big, long one, but you still should have one. Architectural patterns applies to all projects, I believe. Prototypes, I think, should be used on all projects. Interface bridges and test harnesses. I think your larger projects, and in particular those larger, and mainly because those larger projects tend to have more interfaces and more complex interfaces. Technical white papers, all projects, whenever you have a technical decision to make. Code walkthroughs, those have been shown to be very, very effective in terms of finding defects. And so I would recommend those for all projects. And simulations, I would say your medium size and larger projects where there's an opportunity that makes sense. All right, let's go through some exercises. So here we have an EVM dashboard. And in particular, so what we have is the total project scope in terms of function point equivalence. We have allocated scope is the amount of that scope that's been assigned to some component within our backlog. So we have some scope that hasn't yet been defined, like an unanticipated task kind of a budget. The earned value, so the work that's been done to date, the earned business value is 3,171 FPE. So the project's 31% complete in terms of FPE. Our schedule performance index is 1.02. Our cost performance index is 1.0. Our effort performance index is 1.0. We have the estimate to complete and estimate at complete down below, and our forecast completion date as well. These are calculated based on the earned value. And then in the matrix down on the right-hand side, the table down on the right-hand side, The right-hand column, I have the approved baseline. So what the values were when the project was initially approved. Then I have the values as of fiscal year 21. So we can see like what we're looking at is trends here. Then we have fiscal year 22 for quarter one, and fiscal year 22 quarter two. So we can kind of see from the right to the left the project marching across time. But these are just basically snapshots of the project dashboard at each of those times. So my question is the project healthy? If not, what are the causes? And do you see any areas where you see a problem and you think changes are required? And I'll give a moment for people to jump into chat or however you want to answer, just to think about it. Okay, so back to what do we think? Is the project healthy? This is a kind of a poster child illustration of a healthy project. We're around 1.0 for all three indexes, which is great. If we look at the approved baseline budget approved by Department of General Services or whoever, it was 145 million. Our estimate at complete is right around 145 million. Looking at the trends, we can see that we started to have a little bit of a dip in a couple areas, not even really that significant, but a little bit of a dip in a couple areas, then the cost performance and effort performance, but that the project, I saw that and took some corrective action apparently, and that corrective action appears to have worked well. Looking at the scope, we started off at 10,000 FPE. We're now 10,118. So the scope's gone up a little bit, but not a lot. Nothing that I'd be concerned about at all. That's very normal for it to bounce around a little bit. So overall, this is like a really good, healthy project. I would say the odds of this project finishing on time and on budget and so on are very good.
So Imran has an interesting point in the chat.
Okay. Let's pull that up. Let's see.
Mhm.
Sometimes cost impacts lag behind a bit. Right, so in FY21, EPI is trending downwards. That result and is going to be reflected in cost performance index FY22 Q1. The trends will, the trends are showing what direction it's going, but the only lag that you're going to have, the short answer is no, that it doesn't carry forward unless you have, unless you're continuing to overspend, or unless you're continuing to not be as efficient as expected. So let's say that we had a momentary dip for one quarter where our efficiency dropped, and so our performance index, went down. But then our efficiency went back up to where we expected it to be. Without making any other change, the performance index will gradually improve as you go forward. The amount of lag that we're going to have is going to be based on reporting lag only. So if we have if we have data for cost and schedule that is within this quarter, that's accurate as of this quarter, then there won't be any lag. It'll be accurate as of that time. Now, if our cost data is reported but we're 3 months behind, then yes, there would be a 3-month lag, and that can be an issue, especially if your FPE delivery is not linear. One of the things that, and I know, Imran, you're working on a project that in California where there's a problem because a lot of the cost data comes out of the fiscal system in California, which very definitely has a significant lag that can create a problem. And what we do, and it's not perfect, but what we do is we forecast forward and then do an adjusting entry to compensate for that lag. So let's say that I've got the actual costs as of 2 months ago, but then I can forecast what the costs were for this last 2 months. I then use the actual costs as of 2 months ago, plus the forecast costs for this 2-month period to come up with the estimated actual costs as of today. And then each reporting period, you do an adjusting entry to retrue it up. So the goal is always to have the number be as accurate as we can as of our best guess of what the numbers are as of the EVM report date.
And Imran confirms that is where he was going.
Yeah, I figured, and I ran into that exact same problem.
Okay.
And also keep in mind, EVM is not a budgetary or an invoicing or whatever, so we can't estimate numbers. We just have to get close enough for management reporting. Okay, so project XYZ, this is a hypothetical project, has earned value measures of schedule performance index 1.01, cost performance index 1.0, effort performance index 0.99. So what I want to know is, what can we say about this project? This project's, there should be a apostrophe there, sorry. This project's efficiency. Are they using financial resources optimally? This project's productivity. Are they delivering work with the optimum number of labor hours? Velocity. Are they delivering work at an optimal pace of delivery? So these are 3 things that we would like projects to be doing well relative to benchmark data. So what can we say about this project in those 3 dimensions? And I'm pausing to give you guys a moment to think about it. And I have this example in here because the answer is absolutely nothing. The earned value management only tells us if the project is on track or not relative to plan. That's it. So in order to know if the project is is efficient or productive or is maintaining a good velocity, you have to compare the project results with those 3, with the dimension of interest, with some kind of a benchmark, whether that's other projects, whether that's industry benchmark data, whether that's your goals, whatever it is. But looking at that requires something other than earned value management.
And William, that was a loaded question.
It was. Yeah.
And basically what you're saying is that the measure of efficiency, productivity, or velocity would be comparing this project's metrics, if you will,
Right.
to a similar successful projects from a benchmark perspective.
Mhm.
You're basically stating that this project is on track, with what it planned for its efficiency, productivity, and velocity. It's on track for the most part. But to say whether or not it's efficient, productive, or has good pace requires the benchmark.
Exactly. In fact, if I go back to the formulas here, where do I have the, I have to go way
back.
back. So you see how we have the formulas: earned value divided by planned value, earned value, actual cost, earned value, actual effort. If you wanted to do comparisons, you turn those equations around. And what we're interested in is actual effort over the earned value compared to benchmark,
Right.
or actual cost over the earned value compared to benchmark. Exactly.
Yeah.
So the data is useful, but it's not really giving you what it's not really
Not
helping you
answering
benchmark
that
the project.
question.
It's not
Right.
answering these three questions.
Right.
Okay, so here's another earned value management dashboard. So this project, we've got total scope 19,400. And I'm showing you these dashboards because pretend that you're the project manager or you're the project oversight agency, and you've got a project that's reporting earned value to you. And so it's your job to figure out what to do with that data. So we've got a project, 19,000 FPE in scope. 49% of that's allocated, 31% complete, and we have a schedule performance index of 0.52, cost performance index 1.0, effort performance index 1.0, and then on the bottom right-hand side, you can see the again for the last year and a half what the various values are. So my question is the questions are: is the project healthy? If not, what are the causes? And what changes are likely to be required?
Got some ideas in the chat.
Let me bring those up. Okay. So here's how I would read this. Schedule, the problem is specific to schedule. Schedule performance index is bad and trending down. 1.0, 0.81, 0.58, 0.54, 0.52. So it's bad and getting worse. But everything else is on track. So the team is working to deliver the work. The work that they're delivering it per plan. The effort that they're putting into it is per plan. So what's going wrong? Well, I'm looking at this and take a look at the scope line, which is the top line. So the current scope is 19,400, but take a look at the approved baseline scope, 10,063 function point equivalents. Then at fiscal year 21, it increased to 12,400. Last quarter, it jumped to 17,421, then 18,500, 19,400. So the scope is basically doubled. So of course, the project schedule is hosed because we have if the scope had stayed at 10,000, the project would be fine right now. So what we have is we have a project that's unhealthy. It's unhealthy because the scope is double what the baseline scope was, but without a corresponding increase in cost and effort, and budget and effort and so on. So the project was never re-baselined. So now the question becomes, why did that scope jump that much? Is it because of poor scope management? So they're off building a bunch of stuff that's gold plating, or that's functionality that's not that useful, or was never approved, or whatever. That's one possibility. Or was the initial scope radically, and so if that's the case, then the answer is to go through and cut scope, to go through and chop out. This whole set of reports is gone. This whole set of screens, no, they're phase 2, they're gone. So basically to do a radical exorcism exercise to get rid of scope. If the project is that the initial scope was poorly conceived and what the business really needs is more like what we have right now, more like the 20,000 FPE. Let's say that this truly is what's necessary. Then what you want to do is you want to go back and do a budget change request, SPR, software project report, to get more money and to get more time and to add resources. And then you want to re-baseline your project. And so once you re-baseline the project, then basically your earned value management starts over again. So with the new baseline, you're going to be back to 1.0. You'll have your new budget, your new team, which will be about twice as big as your old team, your new schedule, which will be longer than the old schedule, and everything will be back on track. And that may be perfectly fine.
So
All right.
several people in the chat picked up on the scope creep and on the under-resourcing potential that you would need to do. So
yeah, good,
yeah.
Good. And so EVM doesn't always. What did it point to right there? It pointed to, and it really wasn't a horrible thing. It really just pointed to the fact that that the necessary scope for this project is significantly more. And as long as the business value justifies the added cost, that's not really a problem. What would have been a problem is to have this project continue to flounder without rebaselining, everybody discouraged, nobody can get this done. Nobody's, you really want to recognize what's going on and then rebaseline, and then everybody can be happy and not stressed, and it's a good project.
Yep.
All right, let's see, I've got, okay, so here we have a little bit similar situation. EVM is we see that the schedule performance index is 0.87, 1.0, 1.0. How about this project? Is this project healthy? What do you think are the causes and are changes required? So it's interesting because the schedule performance index numbers have a very similar pattern. They're started off at 1. They always start off at 1. They started off at 1, and then the schedule performance index is steadily dropping. The other numbers are holding pretty well. So if I'm looking at this, what I'm saying is that the team is working and delivering things roughly as expected. However, they're not achieving the desired schedule and are consistently falling farther and farther behind on the schedule. So there's 2 possible causes for that. One is maybe there's hindrances to them effectively staying on track time-wise. Maybe there's things that are causing the work to be, like, for example, maybe whenever they need to get a decision, it takes an inordinate amount of time for them to get approval to go forward. And so that slows them down. Maybe there's some other thing going on that's causing schedule problems. That's a possibility. Often the actual element here is that the initial schedule was unrealistic. So I'm going to be looking at this, and first thing I'm going to do is see whether I can rule out, is this team having schedule problems because of something that can be fixed? And if there's something that can be fixed, then maybe we can get the project back on track in terms of schedule. But if the project seems to be doing pretty much normal stuff in terms of IT development, but the schedule is steadily slipping, I'm going to go back and say that initial schedule was probably unrealistic to begin with. And so they're just seeing the implications of that. And right now, the EVM forecast to complete, the original schedule was the 30th of January, 2026. EVM is forecasting the 30th of November, 2026. I'm going to probably go back and say, we don't need more budget. We don't need more people, but we want to slip our schedule to where we're going to deliver on the 1st of January, 15th of January, 2027, to give me a little bit of margin or something like that. So if possible, what I would say in this situation, assuming that there's nothing that can be fixed about this, the speed of development, the velocity of development, I would say, let's rebaseline just the schedule part of it.
At that point, William, you would want to do a bit of a root cause to really try to understand what's causing the schedule slippage.
Exactly.
Some guesses.
Exactly.
There's some guesses in the chat, and I found one of them humorous.
Oh, well, share it.
Carrie says delays in government reviews.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I do think that I do think that in all of these cases, if you have a problem, you want to do a root cause analysis rather than doing a knee-jerk reaction to it.
Yeah, or just re-baseline it and start over, but you never really fix the underlying issues, and 2 quarters later, you're in the same boat.
That's right. That's right. Well, and the root cause analysis will often point to opportunities for improvement that make the project better and people happier, and All right, so here's a project where we have 1.02, 0.92 for the cost performance index, 1.0 for effort. If we look at the cost performance index, it's kind of dropped down, still dropping down. So is the project healthy? What are the causes? Right now, the budget's 145 million. Right now, the forecast to complete is 157 million. So we're about, what is that, 12 million over budget, or the forecast is we'll end up 12 billion over budget. So is the project healthy? What are the causes? What are the changes required? So I would say the project does have a cost issue. I think that that's fairly clear. The effort's being expended, the schedule is getting done, but the costs are higher than expected. So now again, we do the root cause analysis. And what are some possible causes we're going to be looking for? Well, one might be just that the vendor labor rates are higher than expected. For example, let's say that we were planning on a 50-50 onshore-offshore mix. And it turns out that we're at a 60-40 mix, where 60% onshore, 40% offshore. That would show up as something like this, because the average labor rate that we're paying is now higher. So the work is getting done, on schedule, but our blended average labor rate that we're paying is more than we expected. What would be another potential cause? Well, let's say that we looked at the project and most of those costs were in the other direct charge area. And it turns out that we were going to license a product, Salesforce or SPR or whatever, and that the license costs for that are way higher than we planned. Well, that's a different root cause and a different potential solution. So really, again, what we're focused in on is not people's effort. We're not focused on schedule. The question is, why is the work that we've done to this point more expensive than we were planning? And that's normally either going to be something related to labor rates or something related to the other direct charges.
As I thought, Imran had a good guess too, and it's basically, the type of resource that you thought you were going to need when you started the project. Turns out to be maybe a more specialized resource in the end, which costs more. So
That's right. Yeah. Again, so what we have is we have a different labor mix with a different set of labor rates. And so again, we have to figure out, okay, if that's really necessary, then what do we do about that? Do we find the savings elsewhere? Do we rebaseline, et cetera? Okay, last one I'm going to look at. Here we have a project. Schedule performance index is dropping. Cost performance index staying pretty steady. Effort performance index is dropping. What do we think? Do we have a project that's healthy, not healthy? What's going on? This project has some more significant problems. In particular, it's got 2 out of the 3 that are in a red category. But it's looking to me like what's ended up probably happening here is that we're not staffing it appropriately, and that the lack of staff of the right skill mix maybe is probably causing both schedule problems and effort performance problems. So or the staff are so that's more than likely what's going on. So, but we have to do again a root cause analysis because we have some issues with respect to the labor, to the staffing, and possibly related to that, we have issues related to schedule. So in summary, you want to use a risk-based approach to selecting a control strategy. You want to right size based on size, complexity, and risk. Then you want to select the appropriate tools. You want to do your control at a high level rather than micromanaging the project. Too much control can be as harmful as too little control. The most critical control mechanisms are outcome-focused work order authorizations or statements of work or task orders, and project milestone reviews. Those are the 2 most critical things for project success. And EVM is critical, especially for large agile development projects where it can be really useful. And we've got a slide in here in your slide deck for various seminars that we're putting together, and they're going to continue into 2023. And then I've only got 1 minute, and then I'm going to have to, or maybe 2 minutes, well, 1 minute, I have to drop off. So maybe time for one quick question.
we're starting to get some thank yous in the chat, and I also posted where folks can click to find out about the ongoing training.
Good, good.
So
Yeah, here I'll bring up the.
that's great. Love the good interactive chat. Appreciate it, everybody participating.
Yeah.
Got some bonus templates too from our friends at the FAA.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent.
People like the exercises too, William. I think that was very, very valuable. Good ad.
Yeah, good.
And when you do go to register your units, this is probably our most frequently asked question. You won't find Elyon Strategies. You won't find Level 4. You basically enter the company in to register your PBUs. If anybody has any difficulty with that, I'll be emailing you, so you can email me back.
Okay. Well, I enjoyed it. I'm going to drop now.
Yeah, me as well. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.